Hey guys, LevelCap here. Today we're going to be talking about some Battlefield news, what's being worked on with the game, and some interesting stuff discovered by one of the users on Reddit. Now the first thing I want to talk about is some recent tweets by Demise, also known as Alan Kurtz. He's one of the lead gameplay designers for Battlefield 4, and one of his tweets was talking about balancing DMRs, RGO grenades, and V40 mini grenades, which I think is a great place to start with balancing for Battlefield 4. One of the weapon classes, in my opinion, is borderline useless, and the mini grenades and the regular grenades have gotten out of hand, especially in any sort of infantry heavy map. The grenade spam is just crazy. I feel like most of my deaths when in combat seem to be like they're from grenades, and usually just random grenades, especially when you get 3 minis. You can just chuck them in the general direction that you see guys on the minimap, and you're likely to get a kill or two. Personally, I would love to see mini grenades and impact grenades reduced in count to 1. Now, I think that there's some balancing that would need to be done aside from this, but if you think about it, a regular impact grenade, the standard M67, is a pretty good grenade. I mean, it'll kill somebody in one shot if you get it close enough to them, but it doesn't throw very far. Now, the mini grenade throws much further. It's basically because its flight time is much longer. It usually goes off right around the time that it lands, so it gives your enemies very little time to get out of the way, and it's easy to thread the needle and get it exactly where you want. So having a further thrown grenade with only 80 damage seems like a fair trade-off. In fact, I think 1 mini is almost equivalent to 1 M67 frag grenade. Likewise, the RGO impact has that same effect of going off exactly when it impacts, so it doesn't give any of your enemies time to get away. I think giving only 1 impact grenade and then increasing its damage to say 80 would again balance it out with the M67. The big downside of the M67 is that you can't throw it that far and people have time to get away from it. The other grenades, they don't have time to get away from generally, or you can throw them really far. So you got to balance them out, but I really think lowering the basically the grenade count to 1 for all types of grenades would reduce the grenade spam drastically and actually turn Battlefield back into a shooter rather than the grenade spam that it seems to be. Now, if you've been following the conversation on Twitter, Demise has sort of opened up the discussion of the mobile anti-aircraft tanks, which have gotten complaints of being overpowered. I think they are overpowered, and I also think it's an issue of helicopters basically being underpowered versus some of their weapons, specifically the active radar missiles. Now, right now, when a helicopter gets hit by active radar missiles, it almost always makes it nosedive, and it's basically a situation where the pilots cannot pull out of the nosedive. So even though the damage isn't crazy and it's usually not enough to disable the helicopter, it is enough to make it crash anyway, essentially achieving the same task. My personal suggestion for this is that active radar has an infinite range right now. You can shoot them out of the spawn location of your base and actually take out a helicopter taking off from the spawn location of your enemy's base all the way across the map. You'll see this in a few different maps in Battlefield 4. It's extremely aggravating, and my first suggestion would be to make active radar missiles have a range where they can lock on. After you go outside that range, they're not going to lock on anymore, and this in effect would make them a little bit more of a close range weapon, very effective at, like, say, shooting at a jet that's passing by overhead and dealing massive damage, or shooting at a helicopter that's getting a little bit too close to you and taking them out quickly without having to wait for that lock-on time. On top of that, I would also try and reduce some of the roll effect that the missiles have against helicopters, and this would actually put some of the skill back in the game and make anti-aircraft tanks a bit less overpowered. I'd love to know what you guys think about balancing out the helicopters, the attack helicopters, and mobile anti-aircraft tanks. It's a pretty serious issue in Battlefield right now, considering that MAA pretty much rules the skies right now, and jets and helicopters and all that just aren't what they used to be. If you're an infantry guy, then I'm sure you don't mind too much with the skies being as clear as they are, but in terms of an actual balanced gameplay, it would be nice to get some of the power back in the skies, not counting attack jets. Now, in other news, the Reddit side of things, there's a very interesting post that I'm actually going to link in the video description if you want to check it out for yourselves. But basically, a Reddit user has gone through the Battlefield files and found evidence, basically sound files and other things, that have suggested that there was actually Levolution intended for the new maps in China Rising. That was one of the big complaints with the China Rising expansion pack, is that Battlefield was all about Levolution, and then the new maps didn't have any form of it it whatsoever, so people were pretty disappointed. Even Second Assault has had Levolution events in it, but China Rising didn't have any. Well, it turns out that they actually were planning on Levolution events for China Rising, and it looks like they got cut, or perhaps somebody forgot to activate them or something last minute before they got put in. Here's what was actually planned. Altai Range, the big, wide open map with the mountain in the center, and I've often criticized this map for being a little bit too open and a little bit too friendly for vehicles. Well, a snowstorm was going to roll in. I assume this would greatly reduce visibility and give infantry sort of an upper hand and probably make aircraft and stuff like that far less effective. So it would swing the scales towards infantry combat later in the progression of that map. That sounds awesome, and it seems like it would have made the map a lot more fun, a lot more interesting. It also would have been really cool to see the effects of snow piling up on the ground where it hadn't been before. Silk Road also had a sandstorm planned for it. Now, if you've been playing Gulf of Oman, it's probably going to be very similar to that one, but even so, a sandstorm would have been very cool to see in Silk Road. That map, again, is very open, very vehicle intensive, at least in the outskirts of that map, so having a sandstorm reducing the engagement distances for infantry would be a very cool thing to see. Guilin Peaks, which is one of the most beautiful looking maps out there, was going to have heavy fog roll in. Again, reducing visibility, making things even more close quarters. I like Guilin Peaks a lot. It would have been very cool to see a heavy fog bank blow in and then going through those caves and heavy fog environments, greatly reducing the engagement distances. Either way, it just would have been neat to see something change up the combat. Now, they weren't able to figure out what the Levolution event plan for Dragon Pass was, but I have a feeling it could have been something as cool as, say, a flash flood. You'll notice in the map that there's a lot of weird areas where boats kind of get stuck on very shallow areas of the river. If you imagine a flash flood coming through the valley and raising the water level by, say, 5 to 10 feet, then all of a sudden, instead of lots of tanks spawning in that map, which there are plenty of, patrol boats could spawn in, or attack boats could spawn in, and that would sort of change up the battlefield and reduce the landmass significantly and change it into a water combat map. That could have been amazing. I have a feeling something like that was planned for it, and I would love to see DICE actually go back and implement some of these Levolution events. You know, the fans would really appreciate it, and I think it's kind of one of those things that perhaps you owe the community. I mean, there's been a lot of things wrong with Battlefield 4 since launch, a lot of issues, a lot of people having really bad game experiences. This would be one cool way of sort of giving back to the community. You know, enough with the double XP events. That doesn't really take you guys any time. It doesn't really add anything to the gaming experience. I would love to see you guys go back in and add in the Levolution that was originally planned for China Rising. Obviously, the dev team is still working on a lot of the network related issues, but I'm sure their dev team is big enough to the point where they can focus on multiple things at once. So one part of the team focusing on network issues, the other part actually focusing on balancing things out and implementing new content to the game, I think is an important process to any structure and any development plan. So that pretty much wraps it up for what's going on in the world of Battlefield right now. Let me know what you guys think might have been that fourth Levolution event. Let me know if you think I'm right with the flash flood or if something else seems to make more sense. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. This is LevelCap, signing off.